Welcome back to Adventures with Bam. I'm Brent Billings.
And I'm Maggie Billings.
And this episode has Maggie interviewing me about my trip to Washington, D.C.
I can't wait. Brent, tell me everything.
Well, what's most preposterous about this is that I knew we had a lot of Bama listeners in the D.C. area and several friends who all happen to be out of town, conveniently. But I was like, I need an excuse to go to D.C. And I also needed to do some kind of professional development conference. So I just looked up conferences in DC and found some sort of like Chamber of Commerce sort of site that had a list. And I just went down the calendar until I found a conference that would actually apply to what I do.
Which was?
It was a voiceover conference. So a little bit of a, because I'm not getting into voice acting. But there were some breakout sessions on editing audio, which... I mean, it was even more perfect than I expected it to be. It just deals with all of the exact problems that I deal with on a daily basis editing audio.
Okay.
So that was great. And then I also did some vocal coaching, which that was more of a like, I don't even know what I don't know kind of a thing. Let's just see what happens. And it turned out to be great. The vocal coach has been doing this for like, I don't know, 30 years or something ridiculous.
Wow.
She's been in the game a long time, has coached tons and tons of people, including, among others, seminary students who have gone through all of these classes on how to like develop a sermon and do all this stuff, but then don't know how to actually deliver that
Interesting.
in a, compelling way vocally. So yeah, it was great.
So is she the one behind the classic pastor cadence?
I don't think so necessarily, but
that's just cultural.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm not even completely sure what you mean by that.
You don't? I feel like when you go, I mean, I don't know, because there's so many denominations. So
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, what exactly are you referring to by that?
So pastor, I feel like there are typically when a pastor is giving a sermon, there is like a predictable cadence that if you have been in church culture for a while, may not even notice this there, but it's this typical like ramping up and ramping back down for dramatic effect. Sermon about like loving your enemies. Very typical. A pastor could be like, the culture says that you need to fight for your rights and do all these things and stand up for yourself. But Jesus says to love our enemies. Okay. We're going to take a moment and we're going to pray. I want you to pray, and I want you to search your heart and think about, who are my enemies and how can I love them? We're going to invite our worship team. You know what I mean? Like, it's this just not, it's a thing. I'm not crazy. It's a thing.
I see what you mean. No, I don't think she's responsible for that.
All right.
This was more about like the inflection of how I read the words, the emphasis, and stuff like that. How you go up and down with intensity. And
do you feel like you have already applied any of this in your recordings?
Oh yeah.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah. So like if we take, so here's Exodus 5. So here's how it reads. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." And you kind of come down at the end, and it's just like very matter of fact, very like just not a lot of personality.
Cut and dry.
It's not open. It doesn't really give room for interpretation or room to think. So here's how I read it now. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." And it like has this energy, this like forward motion to it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's the best example. It just happened to be the passage that I had open.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm just like thinking about how I read things, and instead of just like, and then they did this, and then they did that, and just like...
It's part of a moving story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
And I've had other vocal coaching before, but that was more in like a presentational sort of style. And this was more in a voiceover sort of thing.
Okay.
The stuff that I've had coaching on before was more on how I speak extemporaneously, like we are doing on this podcast generally. And the voiceover thing was not necessarily, it's not like it wouldn't help those sorts of things, but it was more on like, how do you read I mean, generally, it's like, how do you read a script? You're being handed a script, and it's sort of the same thing that I have a script. I have a Bible with words written down, and I have to read it.
Script, sure.
Yes, exactly. So the conference was great. I enjoyed it.
I'm glad. And then what? What else?
Well, I got to meet lots of Baymont listeners.
Very good.
I found out that the Air and Space Museum has a second location in the DC area that was like, so my conference was at a hotel right by the Dulles airport. So I flew into Dulles and then went to this hotel that's just on the other side of the highway from the airport property. And they have an Air and Space Museum building like a couple miles, 2 or 3 miles south of where I was, which had, among other things, an observatory where you could watch planes land on a particular runway.
Wow, what a dream for you.
Yep. It's pretty good. I went, that's the first thing I did when I went into the building. But I actually had a Baymont listener meet me at the museum.
Oh my gosh.
So I wandered around with James for a couple hours there, and that was great. And then I went to it was kind of like a lumberyard sort of concept, only it was outdoors mostly.
When you say lumberyard,
so
you might want to.
I was saying that for your sake.
Okay, sure.
But basically, they had like a big yard area, and there were food trucks, there were some restaurants, bars, there was like a stage, and there was a concert going on, which thankfully we were far enough away from that it wasn't too disruptive to our conversation. But we were like sitting around a fire pit, and some people had pizza and some people had some other stuff. So that was cool. Got to meet a bunch of people from a couple different Baymont groups there. Had dinner with another group, sort of a group. It was like a guy who has sort of wanted to start a group but hasn't started it. But he and his wife listened. But also one of his coworkers came. We had like it was like kind of a fancy-ish sort of Indian restaurant, but it was like a 2-hour meal, which was
that's my dream.
So refreshing. I know that probably sounds horrible to most people. But man, it was like
2 hours of eating Indian food with people.
Yeah. And they were so kind to like make things exactly how I needed them to be made for dairy purposes and spice purposes and everything else.
Wow. You didn't pull a Ted Lasso and just tell them to...
Oh, no, I did not.
Make it for me like you make it for your family.
But we did talk about that scene while we were there.
That's good.
Yeah, so that was fun, and I went to a couple different Apple stores. Went to one to try to ask them about fixing my AirPods because I have this weird, like, I don't even know how to explain it. I had a hard time explaining it to them, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't think anything's wrong. Maybe you just need different ear tips."
It's all in your head.
Well, it's not that, but I haven't actually tried their fix yet, so inconclusive at this point. But I also went to Carnegie Library Apple Store, which is just a beautiful building.
I didn't see that in your photos.
No, I didn't take any photos on my big camera for that.
Okay.
Let me show you real quick.
What? This is an Apple store?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. What did this used to be?
A library.
Oh, I guess you said that.
Yeah, the top floor is, I think, a museum. And then the basement is like an exhibit about the building itself.
Of course.
How it came to be. And
ooh, trees.
Yeah, trees on the inside.
Skylight. Arched windows.
Yes, seriously, just an incredible building.
Wow, what a place.
So that one, I didn't need anything. I just went there to look at the building itself.
Of course.
Yeah, so the last day that I was there, I went into DC proper because I was like, Dulles Airport is like an hour from the National Mall. So the last day I was in DC, I went to the Museum of the Bible, which pretty cool, actually. I was
you were a little skeptical, right?
I was skeptical. I thought it was going to be cheesy, and some of it was. But in general, I think it was actually really impressive. The exhibits were really good. If you don't know a lot about the history of translating the Bible or the history of Christianity and the Bible in America, like actually really good exhibits.
Okay. What did you find cheesy? Can you answer that without offending everyone?
I don't know if there's anything specific.
I feel like I saw pictures. I don't remember if you posted them or if I like clicked on a hashtag, and it looked like a play set, like a stage play of like Jerusalem, like that kind of.
Yeah,
stuff.
That is probably the one. I didn't even take any pictures in that.
Okay.
It was like, I mean, it was cool.
Sure.
But just having been to Israel, I'm like, okay, it just feels a little bit like
Hokey
a little
pokey.
too glossy. And not even that it was glossy, but just, I don't know. It was still cool. It was still cool.
Yeah.
It was also a pretty small exhibit, so
Sure.
it didn't feel as immersive as I think I maybe would have wanted it to.
Yeah.
But in general, I mean, they had this exhibit with a mosaic that they transported the whole mosaic into the museum, and it was just incredible.
I need a documentary on how they transferred it.
Yeah, I
feel like when you move something that big,
yeah,
I need to know
sure
how.
they broke it into smaller pieces,
Sure,
and whatever, but they probably shipped over the archaeologist to reassemble it.
Oh man, that's crazy.
But it was good. The food was insanely expensive.
Oh, sounds about right for museum food.
Yeah, lunch was probably 3 times what it would have cost outside of the museum.
My,
I did go to the downtown Air and Space Museum briefly after the Museum of the Bible, and then I was also lime scootering all over DC, which was delightful.
The best.
Dropped by the Lincoln Memorial at one point, which is surprisingly inspiring to me. The first time I went to DC, I went to that memorial and was just blown away by the words of Lincoln. And it's not like I hadn't heard those words at some point before, but just like,
are you talking about the speech?
Yeah, I think
not the.
I think the one that hits me the most, I believe, is his second inaugural address.
Yeah, that's the one that you sent me.
Is that
that longer one with the 3 columns?
Yeah, but they're it's all good, and just
it's so
I don't know,
good.
It just seems surprisingly relevant even to today.
Very relevant. As I was reading it, I was like, "What is this speech?" Because this feels this feels surprisingly modern. Like so much of what is said, I'm like, is he talking about, like, who's speaking here, and are they talking about things from the last like 4 or 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So that was good. And I did go to the Thomas Jefferson Memorial in the evening after my meet and greet. And that was also pretty good. Like, it's like these memorials are showing these guys in the best light. So it's like, I think Thomas Jefferson in particular is not as well regarded as he maybe once was. And the memorial is not necessarily addressing that, although apparently they're working on building a museum underneath the Thomas Jefferson Memorial.
Oh my!
Or maybe that might have been Lincoln. Maybe both. There was something. I'm pretty sure there was something underneath the Jefferson Memorial. Definitely Lincoln Memorial under construction, and they were doing that. But yeah, either way, like, I don't know. DC is so much more inspiring to me than I feel like it would. I don't know. Because maybe that's normal.
I feel like you're not overtly patriotic.
No, not at all, really. I like American ideals, and I am often disappointed in how we actually live up to it.
Sure. When you say American ideals, I mean, justice,
liberty, and justice for all. But
sorry,
it's complicated. But I go to DC, and it's like, man, I feel like we laid a good foundation for what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So overall, trip, what if you could go back and spend more time at any of the places that you went, where would you go?
Not necessarily any of the places that I went, but there's just so much more in DC that I have not spent.
Okay.
All the Smithsonian's. I would love to go to the Capitol. I would love to do a White House tour. Like, there's so many, and even all these other places, like off the beaten path. Like, there's all kinds of other museums. There's new museums that have gone up in the last, 10 or 15 years since the last time I was in DC. And there's just a lot. The art buildings, which I was probably, I'm still not that interested in them necessarily, but I feel
art?
like I am interested in art, but more so as time goes on.
Okay.
When I wouldn't have even considered going into one of the art museums when I first went there in 2011.
Really?
So the fact that I even had a desire to go into one of those buildings, but it's like I didn't have time.
My plan is working.
Much left to do,
okay.
But I did accomplish the ultimate goal of recreating my favorite photo of any airport.
Oh, yeah.
I had an early morning flight out of the Reagan Airport. And the first time I flew in there, I flew in right at sunrise, basically. And I go out into the main terminal hall, and there's this giant American flag hanging from the ceiling. And just this long hallway with all these windows on one side facing the sunrise and just this golden glow. And I just stumbled into it the first time. And so this time I had an early flight, but not too early. And so I went to the airport early, and I just was like, okay, here's the spot. And I just sat there and waited for the light to come. And man, it did not disappoint.
So I was going to say, because that looks familiar, and I knew you had taken that photo before. We have that somewhere in a big frame,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Don't
printed.
we?
Yeah,
so are you
printed
going to
frame.
reprint it? Because this one's more golden, right?
I don't know.
Might have to.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
We'll do the comparison and see what you think.
All right.
Put them side by side.
I look forward to it. Okay, what I was asking you when you couldn't hear me was if I get to have some of that cookie over there.
Did you have any last night?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the fridge is going to come on in 15 seconds, so let's do it.
It's a big cookie, and it looks like I should eat some of it.